Who's got some more questions for me? Hey.
So like the reason why you have all like these like rides is because like you just like feel like you want to hit it in this spot and just in the same spot all the time.
Well, kind of, yeah. So the question was like, how come I have so many rides and they're in different spots? Is it because I just like having different spots? Kind of. I mean, more so it's the sound that I want is more like a big, washy sort of sound on the cymbals. So these are all different sounds. Like they're all rides, but they're all very different. Like so, this one's very sort of pingy and kind of more like traditional ride sound, and it sort of cuts through the big washiness of these ones. So these are a bit bigger, like. And this one's the biggest one. It's like massive. And this one's kind of a bit smaller, but still a ride. So for a lot of drummers, this is the biggest they'll have is this. And so it's kind of, I like sort of big, washy 70s sounds, which, were you around in the 70s or? No, neither was I actually. It's before both of our times. But yeah, it's sort of my favorite era of rock and roll, which is sort of that classic rock 1970s sound. But good question. Young lady over there.
Have you ever had drum lessons?
That's a great question, Autumn. So that sort of helps me move along in my story in terms of the timeline. So, you know, I played, like I said, to those records for 10 years probably, or maybe 7 or 8 years, and went from being a really bad drummer to being a not so bad drummer to being an okay drummer to being a good drummer, arguably. It took a lot of years, a lot of time in my basement, not my basement, my parents' basement, playing along to records, you know, and so that was my lessons for the first 7 or 8 years, and I realized, you know, there was, I should say during all that time in the early days when I wasn't good, I didn't know that. I didn't know that I was no good, and that's kind of, I think you need to have that sort of naivete, like it's good to be a bit naive, because the music industry is a tough industry to make it in, and I think any dreamer, you know, needs to have a bit you have to work hard, but also have a bit of, be a bit naive, and it's a good thing. So during those first 5 years where I wasn't any good, no one could tell me I was no good, because I wouldn't believe it. And if they did tell me, I'd probably unfriend them, you know. But you know, I just thought I was as good as my idols, which I wasn't, of course. But so about 7 or 8 years in, I started to realize that I couldn't do certain things on certain records. So I'm playing along to like Led Zeppelin records, and I can't do the beat, or I can't do the beat on my favorite Who record. So I realized I wasn't as good as maybe I thought I was. So that's when I took some lessons. So I'd done it for about 7 or 8 years, and then thought, you know, I can do some things, but I should probably do some things better. So I went and got lessons from a guy in town here named Brad King, and he was great. And I still go back to him every now and then to get lessons. And I think that being a musician is sort of like a lifelong journey. It's a lifelong learning curve, you know, and you're always learning. I feel like I'm always a student, you know, and that goes for life in general, but as a musician in particular, I mean, the greatest drummer alive, arguably, is Neil Peart from Rush, and he gets lessons every year, you know, which is like, he's the greatest. Like, who's going to teach him? Well, someone can, and someone can always teach you something you don't know. So, yeah, I got lessons and started working on the stuff that I didn't like working on, which is sort of the rudiments of drumming. And because I was 8 years in, it was sort of like I had bad habits already established on drums, but I think those bad habits actually are sort of a part of a trademark sound in a weird way. Because I've always been, I don't like following rules, and I'm a bit stubborn in that way. You can ask my wife. So I don't like just following what you're supposed to do on the drums. Like, to me, there is no rules, right? Like in music, whatever you want to play, whatever's in your heart, you play it, you know. And so, but at least when I was getting lessons from Brad, like, he showed me not the rules, but some of the fundamentals of drumming, which allow me to do things that I couldn't do before, right? Like like a real drum roll or a one-handed sort of snare roll and that kind of stuff. So anyway, so to answer your question, Autumn, I got lessons when I was about 8 years into drumming, and then I've sort of kept doing it ever since. And I think lessons they're great. Like everyone should get lessons. Like I said, if Neil Peart gets lessons, then all of us should get lessons too. You know. Any other questions? Like, yeah, a couple. Nice. Let's go with you.
Did you play drums when you were a kid?
Good question. So, I mean, I guess like I didn't really play drums until grade 12 in high school, but you know, my mom always says, and this could be my mom making things up. I don't know. You know, 'cause sometimes moms do that. You know, like, and so do dads. But she kind of says she remembers me like banging on pots and pans when I was a kid, which I don't remember, but it makes for a good story. So maybe I did. Maybe I did bang on pots and pans, which I think you should do that when you get home, and your parents will probably like it. It makes for good music. Just don't, yeah. So I think that'd be fun if you tried that. Over there, yes.
So did you ever lose the inspiration in practicing? 'Cause I mean, lots of like music teachers talk about how, or like large musicians talk about like losing the inspiration in practice, like not wanting to do it every day. Like, do you ever lose that at all?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. So, the question is, did I ever lose the inspiration to practice? And yes, especially when I was doing like the rudiment stuff, right? Like, and those are sort of the building blocks of drumming, right? It's so I think if I have weaknesses in my playing, it's because I don't do enough rudiments, and I admit that, you know. I've always been sort of a feel player, so again, so I'd lose inspiration for that kind of practicing, but then I'd never get sick of putting on the headphones and playing along to my favorite records. Like I would do that, you know, other players would out-practice me by far with rudiments, but no one would play along to records more than I would, you know, like, and that's where, for what abilities I have, it's from that, right? Like I would seriously play for 5 to 8 hours a day in my parents' basement, you know. And that's before I had a job, so I didn't have to worry about working, you know, paying bills, all that stuff. Like, I just play, you know, and that's, I felt like I was on stage. You put on like a Led Zeppelin live record and play along, it's like I was in Led Zeppelin, which is like, I was sort of, I wouldn't say an awkward kid, but I mean, I wasn't always the most outgoing when I was young, and when I found music, that sort of showed me who I was, who I am, you know what I mean? Like I found music and then I sort of found myself, you know what I mean? So in there in the basement playing a Led Zeppelin concert, you know, for 3 hours, like the coolest feeling in the world, you know, and then after that it made me feel cool, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I think, but you make a good point, like sometimes it's hard work, right? Like it's a lot of hours playing your instrument, and I think any musician gets sort of like authors do, like writer's block, where you kind of you're stuck on the same thing, or you can't master a certain trick, and it gets frustrating. So in those situations, I mean, it's always good to sort of like just leave it and try something else, or even just, you know, walk away from the drums for a day and just get refreshed, you know, or do what I do. Pick up the guitar and play it poorly, you know. So the switching instruments is kind of fun, you know, or try to sing like I do and it's way off key, you know. That's why I don't have one of these on stage. I mean, like, you'll never see this on me on stage because you don't want to hear me sing, you know. But yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. Any other like anything on your mind at all? Like any questions at all? I just throw them out there because it's kind of fun chatting about things. Yes.
So for a really long time, you just played with, like, you didn't know how to read notes for a very long time.
And I still don't. And that's a good question. So do I know how to read musical notes? I don't. You know, but neither did the Beatles. But like a lot of musicians, at least in rock bands, never know how to read music. And that's a generalization, of course, but so I don't know how to read music. So that was always like just something I accepted. You know, I knew that I couldn't read music, but I could at least put the headphones on and play along with it, which is, to me, what made drumming more attractive than other instruments, because I could just grab a pair of sticks and just do it, you know? Whereas guitar, you have to learn all the chords and stuff, and it's a bit more of a barrier to entry sort of thing. But yeah, so I've never learned how to read music. But if you do you know how to read music? Good for you. All right. Well, I'm one up. I'm already. You're better than me. Good for you. That's awesome. Let's do another song. So for a time. So I graduated law school. Well, first of all, started at the end of high school, went to university, did a bunch of schooling, played in some different bands before One Bad Son. Like, none of them really went anywhere. And then I went to law school, graduated law school, but I didn't want to become a lawyer right away. I thought being a musician, being a rock star was still my goal, and no one was going to stop me. So I graduated law school and went out into the big bad world of the music biz and tried to become a rock star. And that was around 2005. So One Bad Son started around 2005, 2004. So it was sort of, I finished law school, started this band, and unfortunately it took us, well, not unfortunately, just as the world would have it, like, it took us 13 years to get where we are now. We've been together 13 years. So the first 5 years, you know, were pretty lean years for the band. We, you know, playing a few shows out of town and driving, 12 hours to play to like 10 people, that kind of stuff. And it was pretty bleak, I would say, at the beginning. So what I would try to do to pay the bills, which you don't have to worry about that right now, but you may never have to worry about it. Who knows? Maybe you become a rock star, you don't have to worry about paying the bills. But I would do drum lessons. I would teach drum lessons. And so mostly with kids, because I just find that so fun to teach to kids. So one of the songs I often would start with is a song by the White Stripes called Seven Nation Army. And I just love this song because it's just such a simple drum beat, but it's so good. So let's see if I'm getting... So great bass line, and the drums come in so simple. Just kick drum, right? Like, awesome. It's so simple and primal. At some point, we had a... So the drums kind of stay the same throughout. So we call that 4 on the floor. So the kick is going on every beat. And the cool thing about that is, you just start to, you build, again, the idea of the foundation, you just build on the kick drum, right? It's so easy. So what I do with students that I would teach, I'd say, like, let's play along with the White Stripes, which is way more fun than doing like, that's just like, pretty boring stuff, right? So we're playing along the White Stripes. So start with the kick drum, and just from there you do whatever you want. You can add different things, right? Like, so we've got like, for OBS, we have like a few different, I'd say like 1 or 2 songs per record. I do like a 4 on the 4 beat because I just find they're really groovy, and you can sort of, it's like, because the kick doesn't stop, it just really creates a lot of great momentum, and it's almost like you can dance to it. So one of them, let's start with like, that's all just the kick. So you don't, the great thing about Four on the Floor is because the kick doesn't stop, you don't have to think about it anymore. You just sort of like, it's doing its thing, and then everything else just kind of, you don't have to worry about that limb. You know, it's all just your arms from there, right? So that's a song called Rise Up on our new record. That's, you probably heard, like, that's a beat that sort of, it really works in rock and roll. So other songs have sort of had something kind of similar. You know, we got stuff like, we did a cover of a song called Psycho Killer, and that's a Four on the Floor beat as well, which is just, so it's kind of like, you know, a similar idea to the last beat. Just keep the kick going and go from there, right? You sort of build the building blocks. Another one is a song called Flying High. So you see how like the kick just kind of keeps rolling and keeps the song moving forward, which it makes for really a big sound, especially if it's on something like radio, if you're lucky enough. But it also just sort of like, it seems sort of easy on the drums, but it really works. It makes people sort of, well, one producer I had a long time ago said, if people do this is the test. If they do this when they're listening, it's a good rock song, you know, the head bob. And I think a lot of that is up to us all as drummers, you know, like if they're doing this, it's probably not the singer, right? They're probably grooving to the beat, you know. Maybe the bass player has a bit of influence on it, I'm not sure, but no, maybe guitar a little bit too, but yeah, and so those are kind of just some Four on the Floor beats that I find kind of fun. How about some more questions or more discussion? Yeah.
I noticed that you have a very shallow bass drum. It also looks a little larger. What made you decide on that particular size and depth?
Nice. Yeah. So that was. So the question is, yeah, about the bass drum and like it's big but shallow, you know. So basically, I'm lucky. I'm a very fortunate drummer. For the longest time, I was not endorsed by for anything, but in the last few years I've been lucky enough to get cymbals and sticks and skins and drums. So it's like, you know, I'm always blown away by that, just the thought of that, because for the longest time I was, you know, I wasn't very good, right? So, so the guy that made my drums, is a company called YC Drums. It's Young Classics. That's what the YC stands for. And he knew that I wanted this big, everything big. And he said, okay, but if you're gonna go big, you gotta make it shallow so it gets more of a punch, you know? My old kit wasn't shallow, it was like probably back to where my knee is now. And sound techs were always like, I can't make the sound good because it's way too big. It's like, boom, like kind of this like wash, like just this honking noise almost, you know, like when you put a mic on it. So this guy with YC, he's a good friend of mine. He makes all the kits by hand, just himself, and very cool, like small business, you know, just one guy. But he said, let's go shallow, trust me. And I was like, well, it's not gonna look as cool, it's not as big. But he's like, trust me, it's gonna sound way better. So he sent it out to me, I opened it up out of the box, and yeah, the second I hit it, it just like, especially when we're playing live, it sounds massive. So it's the same with the floor toms, like they're kind of shallower too. Like usually floor toms go almost to the floor, you know, but these ones are a bit shallower and just more punch essentially. But that was not my idea; it was all his. So, but yeah, it's my favorite kit I've played on, which is kind of cool because it's the current kit, you know. But yeah, it's a pretty cool feeling to just like have the drums that like you always wanted, you know what I mean? Yeah.
To tune that kit, with your tuning technique?
Yeah, that's a great question. What's my tuning technique? I suck at tuning drums, to be honest. You know, I suck at tuning guitars too. So I kind of go, like, sometimes, like, there are people that can tune drums really well, and they're just like, they're great at it, you know, and that's not me. So for me, like, honestly, and some of it has to, I've just, over the years, I've just learned, like, especially when we record in studio, producers love just a tom that just, you hit it and it dies right away, like, and it's like a punch almost, you know, as opposed to if I tighten these up, and you know, like, they kind of just last longer. So producers, at least producers I worked with, like just a and it's done, because when you're mixing a record, just you hit a tom, it should hit it and stop, and not sort of bleed into the rest of the instrumentation, you know. So I've kind of incorporated that into how I tune it. So I hit it, boom, and it's basically done right away, you know. And you see some guys put like those moon gels on there too, or some put like actual tape on it just to really deaden it. I think it just makes for easier mixing for sound guys, or sound girls, sound people. So I kind of tune it up and get it nice and tight, so it's all, you know, stretched out, and then I like tune it down until it basically, like, as low as I can go before it like starts to be totally dead. You know what I mean? So it's not the most scientific approach by any means, but it works. And sometimes we'll have, you know, sometimes we'll have like a tech with us, like a sound person that travels with us, and he'll give me input too, like what works for what's sounding good out, you know, in the house sort of thing, and for the listeners. So, but yeah, I'm not the greatest at tuning drums, I'll be honest. So I'm aware of my shortfalls. You know? So yes.
Somebody's not brave enough to ask his own question.
Hey, man.
He would like to know where the name One Bad Son comes from.
Okay.
I don't know if he has a really specific reason for wanting to know that.
Well, he's the one bad son, isn't he? You know, we sort of came up with, like, it was a name that, well, at first I didn't like the name, I'll be honest. Like, the band name, I thought this is kind of tacky or whatever, but like, our singer Shane had this idea for a name, and that was the idea. Sort of like the idea, well, this is how he didn't have an explanation for it. This is the explanation I've kind of come up with over time, you know. I would say, like, it's sort of symbolizes like the idea that every family's got like a bad apple, or, you know, bad in quotation marks, like, and that person, but whether it be a boy or girl, like, you know, usually the rebel, sort of, right? And those rebels, imagine if you got 4 of them and put them in a band, you know, what would that be, right? And that's One Bad Son. So, and now I like the name more now, because people really identify with it, especially when they buy our shirts, One Bad Son, like, they are one bad son, you know. And so kind of like the black sheep idea, I guess, or just people that choose the path less traveled, I would say. It's kind of, yeah, what it means to me now anyways. But we didn't really have a good story in terms of coming up with it, you know, so I've had to make it after the fact. I saw a hand back there, maybe?
Maybe.
Hey! How you doing?
What do you want to ask him about?
My favorite song.
Oh! Okay, well, I will say yes if I know the song.
Well, his favorite song or your favorite song?
Can you play your favorite song?
I want you to play your favorite beat.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. That's considerate of you. That's awesome. Okay, well, my favorite song, okay. Well, I mean, one of my favorite, like, one of my favorite beats of all time is When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin. And it's, do you like Led Zeppelin?
His grandpa does.
Oh, nice, okay.
I don't know that one.
Okay, well, you will a bit later, I'm sure. I bet your parents will get you into it. And, Led Zeppelin's one of my favorite bands. I've got their Led Zeppelin's logo is tattooed on my arm, so that tells you how much I like them. But so yeah, the song "When the Levee Breaks" is sort of this groove that never really changes. It's hypnotic, and what I learned from it is you don't have to do a bunch of changes necessarily as a drummer. If you got a great beat, just stay locked in. And it's not. It took me years to learn that. You know, if it's a good beat, just stay locked in. So It's so yeah, it's kind of like the simplicity of it is so cool, and the hi-hats don't really change. It's kind of. And it's got it passes the test of it passes the old head nod test. You know, it starts to get that groove. So that's one of them. I mean, I've got many favorite songs, but that's one of them for sure. Thank you for asking that. What's your favorite song?
Oh, I just make up my songs and I...
Nice. Well, you're more creative than I am. Good for you. You make them up. Do you play drums?
Yes.
Good for you. Well, I look forward to hearing you play sometime. Thank you for asking the question. That's awesome.